Afrikaans is a barrier, but English not. How can the colonial language not not be the barrier? I'm sometimes now not very fond of the English still. And remember that happened 120 years ago. Afrikaners, there was a Carnegie report that said these people are illiterate. Socioeconomically, they're doing bad. We were down in the dumps. And what helped us get out of there is mother tongue education. If you want to be an Afrikaner, you build that on hate for black people.
Okay.
And that is saying, well, if you want to live in a society where there's mutual recognition and respect, you have to get rid of your identity. When does it stop being PR? Should I mention Colonel Karagaya that we help? Should I mention the Dubai family that we help?
You've been quoted as AfriForum saying that apartheid was not crime against humanity.
Yes.
King David Studio podcast.
I've invited to our studio Kallie Kriel, who's CEO of AfriForum, for no other reason but to understand what AfriForum is all about and what exactly, as part of this, rainbow nation that Nelson Mandela created, where do we come together or misunderstand each other? I hope you're well.
Yeah, David, thank you for the invitation. And I'm well. It's great to be here. Yeah.
You recently traveled from Mozambique.
Yes, actually, this morning.
Whoa.
Yeah, no. I had to leave the hotel at 5:30 this morning.
Yeah.
Because, as you know, there are protests in Maputo specifically. And it's with regard to the election results. The opposition think that things were not free and fair.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. They've got a scheduled protest. It's from 8 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. and then they close down the roads.
Then it's normal again.
Yeah. And the problem I had, my flight was yesterday afternoon, 3:45. But there was no way to get to the airport. So I had to rebook. Unfortunately, the airline did not show much sympathy, so I had to pay a penalty fee to rebook. But then I took an early flight. So it seems like if you work there, you're allowed to drive to work at 8 o'clock and you can't go home before 4 o'clock the afternoon. But fortunately, I'm back and I'm glad to be able to speak to you.
Thank you. It's an interesting one that it's a scheduled protest that allows people to live a normal life in the morning and the afternoon. Yeah. That's interesting. Do you think they're achieving their goal, whatever that goal is?
Well, I think they are noticed because if I had an option, I wouldn't have been on the road at that time. But I didn't have an option because I booked the ticket long before the protest was scheduled.
Yeah.
But we drove there anyway. But if you drive into Maputo, it's quiet. So there's not another car on the road.
What?
And so people don't drive. It's the whole city stops.
Wow.
And of course, when we got to the first barriers, we also stopped. So I think the government will take notice. If they will budge, I'm not too sure of that. Because it just depends who's going to give up first.
Interesting. Yeah, well, I guess it's the times we live in. If you're not happy about something, you make your voice heard. And that's really what it is.
Yes, that's why we also have AfriForum, if we're not happy to make our voice heard.
Absolutely. Tell me the history, brief history of AfriForum. When was it formed?
Well, it was formed in 2006. And the reason for that was we've seen a lot of Afrikaners and minorities leaving the country after 1994, which is a tragedy because Afrikaners are not from Europe. They originated there. They were Germans and Dutch, but they only became Afrikaners on African soil. And if they leave this country, they don't remain Afrikaners. They're going to live in England and their children and grandchildren are going to become English. If they go to Australia, their children and grandchildren will become Australians. And we said, no, we are also Africans and we see a future for ourselves here on the southern tip of Africa. But apart from those people that emigrated overseas, you also had many people emigrating inwards. That means build a high wall, just keep quiet, work, and make no contribution to society. And our goal was to say, let's change this. Let's get people involved in the public debate so that Afrikaners can make a positive contribution and not leave the country. And we are happy that we did that. Of course, the other reason as well is Anton Rupert said, you cannot sleep safely if your neighbor is hungry. And therefore, AfriForum has a two-pronged approach. The one is unashamedly to say we have to make sure that there's a future for Afrikaners. But then secondly, saying we're not an island, we're not in isolation. And we have to actually make sure that the whole country is successful and to build relations of mutual recognition and respect with other cultural communities.
Based on your involvement with AfriForum over the years and the recollection of 1994 and the transition, what in your observation, and it's probably just a personal observation, probably based on conversations with your colleagues, was the state of mind of Afrikaners in the 1994 transition? And let's call it between 1990 and 94, because it was quite a moment of transition. What was, in your opinion, the state of mind of Afrikaners in that time?
Well, I think I don't want to stereotype. Of course, Afrikaners don't all think the same. Of course, we differ on many things. So I cannot generalize. But if you look at the referendum results, 2/3 of Afrikaners said that there should be change and that apartheid cannot continue to exist. The other third said no, but the question was actually quite hard, because I know of people that said no, not because they did not want the country to change, but they did not trust the route that it was going to. So I think I can safely say the vast majority of Afrikaners realized that the apartheid system could not continue. One, because it was not morally justifiable, that in the first place, but also secondly, it could not work because it did not take cognizance of the demographic situation of the country, and the minority can never govern sustainably over a majority. So in the end, I think people realized it should change, and that's why the leap was taken, and that we did not see a civil war, Afrikaners fighting against this, because I think most people saw change was necessary. And as I've said, I personally, but though I was still very young then, I would have said there should have been more protection for culture, so that we should not have seen an attack on Afrikaans schools that we are now seeing with the BELA Act.
That's we'll get there. We'll get there. And the core values of AfriForum, what exactly is it? What are you hoping to achieve? Is the bigger picture of AfriForum?
Yes. People are welcome, of course, to go and look at our civil rights charter. That's also on our website. That was our founding document, our freedom charter, if I can call it that. But I must just say, we started off very small. Only 3 staff members, no members, limited funding, and we weren't really sure what we were going to do. We had a broad idea. But we then said, well, let's get our ideas together. And the basic idea is, if I can sum it up, is to build a future for children and next generations to come. And through that, we are saying we need to play a watchdog role to make sure that we stand against injustice and collapse of society. But of course, then also we believe we have a building role to make sure that we make a positive contribution by not just complaining, but building. So those are the two components to say we want to build a future where we are free, safe, and prosperous. But also, if you look in our Civil Rights Charter, it states quite clearly that one of our core values is the promotion of mutual recognition and respect amongst communities. And unfortunately, most of those projects are not known, or that those aren't the things that make the headlines. The fights with Julius Malema makes the headlines. So that makes headlines. But where we have a joint agricultural projects with the Barolong Busaleka or the Amabele community or the Nkungumate community, those things don't make headlines, but those things are necessary. When you have political polarization, one should, and if you look at Twitter or what is now called X, you become despondent if you read that, because you believe the country is on the brink of a civil war.
Yeah, like France.
But if you just put your head out of the door and you go to a shop and you look at the next 10 experiences you have with interpersonal relationships, the vast majority of people are moderate. They just simply want the future for their children. And how do we stop the polarization filtering through to grassroots level is to make sure that we build those relationships on grassroots level. And that's why we have an active campaign to go into even official agreements with various cultural communities in terms of cooperation.
Take me through the growth of AfriForum. You said you started very small, and I imagine that's probably not the only thing that changed. Also, some of the principles of the organization changed over time. What, in terms of the growth of the organization, what has adjusted as time went? Because I imagine, like all of us, you adjust your belt if you gain more weight. So what has adjusted as time went?
Well, I think the core principles stayed the same, but what we had the capacity to do changed, and that also took us in a specific direction. When you start a new organization and you decide, well, I know I was at the dairy farm walking around thinking what name can we use, and then I thought, no, AfriForum sounds nice. But then that name is only in your own head, and then you tell it to your 2 staff members. Now there are 3 people knowing it, but nobody else knows the name. So now you have to say, okay, to get this name known, we need to have some success. But to have success, you need support. But to get support, you need to have success. So it's this chicken-egg situation. So initially, we played more of a watchdog role, but the only thing we could afford to do was protest action.
Okay.
So to say, because then you get the name in public. And I remember we had these printed posters, A2 size, but we left a blank space in the middle, A3 size, and then we could, on a copy machine, make our slogans, then staple it onto the bigger color poster.
Yes.
And then after the protest, just take in it again.
Wait for another protest.
Yeah, we can use it again. So those were the kind of things that we had to do. And remember, in terms of Afrikaners are not good at toy-toying.
They don't have the experience.
No. Well, let's call it what it is. They don't have the rhythm.
Well, I guess
the rhythm. So, and I remember one of our first protests. I thought you just make it known you're going to protest, and then people will come in their numbers. And we organized the protest in Potgietersrus, as it was.
What was it about? What are you protesting against?
There were 7 people killed, cash in transit people. That the truck was burned and they died there. So it was not an Afrikaner issue; it was a crime issue. As I've said, we have this dual approach. And when I got there were only 4 people, and in my car It's the same car that's
That you
outside.
brought, yes, you brought here.
It's an 18-year-old car, so it has come the same route as
Wow.
AfriForum. And we were 4, so we were 8. And then SABC called, and they said, no, we got your media notice. We are sending the camera team. And I was standing there with 8 people, and so that was not good publicity. But then I made a plan.
What did you do?
Run down in town, asked people just that was around, say, do you want to be on television tonight? And we got a crowd of 50 people.
Yeah.
What I only realized afterwards was one of the people had a T-shirt on with Osama bin Laden's face on it.
No. Oh no!
But that's where we learned to say, if you're going to do this, make sure you are well organized, make sure you have structures. And then we started getting more success. Nestle, when Nestle was buying milk from Grace Mugabe, we believe she had got the farm illegitimately, so we decided we're going to take on Nestle. But it's actually, if you think of it today, only 3 people taking on a multinational company. It's impossible. But I was young, so I thought it was possible, but in the end it was possible.
Yeah.
With technology, we had a website, and there was a European newspaper that wrote about the story. And we said, no, let's fight Nestle. We formed the website nestlebloodmilk.com.
Whoa.
Had a few pictures of police beating protesters, giving statistics with regard to infant mortality rate, and then asking people, if you don't want Nestle to buy milk from Mr. Mugabe's wife, send a letter to Nestle's head office in Switzerland, and there was a button, you could do it automatically. Wow. And we gave that story to the European newspaper, they published it, and the Europeans started contacting Nestle, and they got 75,000 letters in one day. And then they said, no, they let us know they're not going to do that anymore. And I remember the newspaper saying in Afrikaans, Nestle swig voor AfriForum. In English, it would be Nestle buckles under AfriForum's pressure.
Okay, yes.
And it created this impression of this huge organization.
How many were you at this stage?
3 people.
Are you still 3?
Yeah. That was where we started getting momentum. Well, I must say we had a 4th person. We didn't have a web designer. So we asked Solidarity, the trade union, if their web designer can help us. So that's how it worked. But as we've grown, when we started with the court case with Julius Malema, we had 8,000 members.
Which one? The killed the Boers?
Yeah, but the one long ago when he was still youth leader of the ANC.
Yeah.
Then we doubled to 16,000, to 32,000, 54,000 every year.
Those are big numbers.
And we have grown now to over 300,000. But you've actually asked me another question, where did we go? As soon as we started getting more resources, we could also change the way that we take on our campaigns. You'll see we don't do too many protests. In important matters, we do it as we did with the BELA Act. But we were able to go into a more practical building things, but also taking legal action. But the one important thing is for people to know is we don't get funding from the Afrikaner elite. Big business don't give us a cent. And business people don't want to get on the wrong side of government. As we are a watchdog organization, we're not on everybody's Christmas card list every year. So business is quite wary. If they give us money and we take government to court, what would the implications for them be? We also don't get international funding. So we went for the crowdfunding.
Okay.
A big stock fell where...
But in the beginning, though, how with when you were still unknown,
Yeah.
How were you able to maintain the machine of protest, amongst other things, or keeping the lights on?
Yeah, no, we had a loan account at Solidarity. In the end, it was 350,000. But remember, in the beginning, to be able to fund yourself, you don't have to have many new members because you only have 3 staff members. Yeah. So we went to a situation of self-sustainability very quickly. But then as we grew, we could appoint more staff members. So we have this crowdfunding and also not the elite, it's middle class and working class people. If they all give a small amount, you can do something with that. And that made us make a directional change in 2012 to say we want to be less of a fighting organization, even though today most publicity we get is in that regard. We want to be 20% fighting and 80%, well, let's not say fighting, let's say watchdog.
I get it.
Let's say watchdog,
Yes.
watchdog organizer, and 80% built. So we started forming local branches in 2012, but it was also a humble start. 1 branch in Delareyville, 1 in Kuruman, and not really knowing what those branches should do. And over time, we've learned lessons. It's not that we've... sometimes people look at the organization and they think, you must be very clever to be able to build this huge organization. But the reality is nobody knows everything. So we've tried many things that did not work. But when you get a formula that works, then you just continue to build on that. So that was what happened. And now today we are happy that we have 200 staff members. We have 12,000 volunteers working without payment. These people that have another job. And we have 165 branches and 177 neighborhood watches. So we are very thankful for how that ability has grown. But I think the formula can also be of benefit to all communities. You have what we say in Xhosa, vukuzenzele. It's just doen it self or ons self. And I think that is in all communities. It just needs to be activated. And that is our program, to activate communities to build a future for the next generation.
Do you know, something that comes out very strongly about AfriForum, naturally, is the Afrikaner leaning. And that tends to rub people in the wrong way. What do you think is misunderstood about AfriForum?
Yeah, I think the problem is when people hear Afrikaner, they think about Eugene Terblanche and they see these guys in khaki riding horses, eating black people.
I can tell you more about what people think. They think apartheid.
Yeah. No,
they think oppression. They think a language that we were forced to learn at some point. And I'm using the whole concept of Afrikaans and Afrikaner. So a lot of thoughts are not always necessarily positive.
Yeah.
But yes, of course, it's a part of South Africa. It's a part of this country that we've built together. So not all the thoughts. When you hear of Orania, the first thought is, what are they doing now? Are they bringing back apartheid again? You know what I mean? There's always that misunderstanding. And that's probably why I'm curious to know, from your perspective as AfriForum, where do you think people don't understand you?
Yes, well, I think you're right in terms of history. Our dilemma is we cannot change history. And I have 4 children that I want to create a future for years. So the best we can do is to say, well, let's make a positive contribution. And, you can tell people nice words and speak on shows like this. They'll always be skeptical with regard to, because you're just saying that. So that is our big approach, the 80%, is practical projects. And we believe through practical projects, you can also change perceptions. And if you look, for instance, at Gerry Nell's work, 95% of people that approach him for help are people from the black community. So it means that in terms of we are moving forward gradually to people saying, well, these people, and if they ask us, it means they know that we would be willing to do so.
Or maybe do something, actually come up with results.
Yeah, and I remember when it was made public that the late Senzo Meyiwa's family asked us to assist because they waited 5 years without any results. And after that, when I was on an interview, people said, well, you are just doing some window dressing. And I said,
it looked like it was PR.
Yeah, but remember, we didn't go to the family and say, we want to help you. They approached us, but then they say, when does it stop being PR? Should I mention Kriel Karagaya that we help? Should I mention the Dubai family that we help?
Yeah.
And many others. The other day, a young female that was that had intercourse with somebody that ate HIV, and she also got HIV. Nobody would help her, a black lady, and we helped her, and that person has now been found guilty of attempted murder because he did not disclose that. So
it was in the papers a few weeks ago.
So there are many of those stories, and we are going to continue with that. But what we cannot do is we're not going to be like some. You know, there are these two poles in Afrikaner community that says, well, if you want to be extreme poles, that's polarized. Say, if you want to be an Afrikaner, you build that on hate for black people.
Okay.
And that is saying, well, if you want to live in a society where there's mutual recognition and respect, you have to get rid of your identity. And we say there is another road to say you can be proud of who you are. That is in line with the Constitution. Unity in diversity, fostering culture. But at the same time, it's not excluding. You can also say, while we are proud of who we are, we extend the hand of friendship to all communities and build this community as a community of communities. And it's going very well. I must say, the other day we had His Majesty King Misizulu being a guest speaker at one of our events, and we are now also going to get involved in a number of projects in rural KwaZulu-Natal. So we are moving steadily forward, and hopefully people will see. They will judge us not by who we are, but by what we do. And of course, it's going to take time. I sometimes now, I'm sometimes now not very fond of the English still. and remember that happened 120 years ago.
Yes.
So I understand those things, the animosity will remain with some. But the best I can do is to say, well, the worst thing I can do is to say, okay, well, let's just have a low profile, just disappear. That we can't do. If we want to build a future, we have to stand up straight and say, we are here, and how can we cooperate?
What do you think people think you are? Those who don't get you?
I think some people know who we are, but for political reasons, they would send out another message. There's a senior politician, well, let me call his name, Mr. Gwede Mantashe. He has a farm near Elliot. And I remember one of these breakfast discussions that was it ANN 7? I can't remember.
Those days.
Yeah,
Yes.
I had a discussion where we had a debate. But in Elliot, we had a neighborhood watch that works with the taxi association, that works with everybody. They form the unit. And Mr. Mantashe attended one of our neighborhood safety meetings, and he knew exactly, and he when I arrived at that meeting, he said, no, he was at that meeting. He said, yeah, it's good we cooperate. And I asked him, did you join? He said, no, because he can join AfriForum, of course. We're not exclusive. But when the camera started rolling in the debate, it was another story. So I think...
What did he portray?
No, he said he comes from this organization, Solidarity, that was the Mine Workers Union, that had job reservation, protecting white privilege and all those kind of things. But I understand it is politics. It's much easier when we take on government on an issue. It's much easier than to answer on the issues just to say, these are a bunch of racists that want to protect white privilege. While I think many of people that do that know that it is not true. And I think in terms of other people, I think it's still that perception that you've mentioned. If anybody says they're an Afrikaner, there must be something terrible about that. But I must say, if we say that is the perception, I wonder how big that is, because in terms of working in local communities, and we do that in many local communities, not once, not even one person said, I won't work with AfriForum because of these terrible people. So I don't think that perception that's being portrayed is reality. We even see it in the other day in Paris, where we had to learn again how to toy. There's a water problem, and we formed jointly with the leaders in the townships, Metsi Pompong, that's fighting for water, and there was nobody that said, no, we cannot
work with these guys.
Yeah, so I'm actually happy that I believe 80% of people in this country are people that want to cooperate, also with AfriForum, and that gives us a strong base to have a future. That's why I won't go to Europe. I won't go to Australia or New Zealand.
It's too expensive to go to Australia anyway.
Yeah, but the biggest price is that your grandchildren would say to you, hi, granddad.
You don't want them to say hi, granddad.
No, they must
you want them to say opa.
Yeah, hello, opa. Yeah, and that's the biggest price to pay, and that price I'm not willing to pay.
Tell me, in terms of, you say you're not exclusive. You're not. So if you are able to give me a sense of your membership structure in terms of demographics, how does it look?
Of course, we don't do racial profiling.
Okay.
I remember,
but if you had to.
Yeah, no, I can thumbsack.
Yes.
But I remember there was a person that was a politician. He was in the DA, he later joined the ANC, Rabelani Dagada.
No, that's yes.
So I bought the Sunday Times the morning, and there's this article of Rabelani Dagada writing why I joined AfriForum. And I said, that's interesting.
Were you aware that they've joined?
No, it wasn't.
Okay.
That's what the point of the story is.
Yeah.
The Monday I got to work and said, I see, just look for me, Rabelani Dagada. And they said, yes, he's a member. I said, when did he join? He joined 3 years ago already at that stage. So unlike what people think, there's not a red light in my office flashing saying
black guy just joined.
Yeah, so that we don't have. But if I would say, I think probably 92% would be Afrikaners, and we don't see ourselves as a white organization. So probably English-speaking whites would be probably 3-4%. Then in the colored Afrikaans-speaking community, probably also 3%. And I would say in black community, probably 1%. But but it's open to all. But I can understand that because we are open about the fact that we take on certain issues that are of importance to the Afrikaans language, then that would not get a lot of white English people join you, but they are welcome to join us. So, but we are open. So
open to anyone.
Anyone, yeah. I'll give you the membership form after.
But what does it mean to be a member of AfriForum?
Yeah,
because you're not necessarily a political party. You're not. What does it mean? And are there other formations similar to yours, for example?
No, not really that we know. It might be the church, but not really. The church can get you to heaven. AfriForum won't.
Yes.
Well, it won't stop you. Let's say it
won't stop you from wanting to go to heaven.
So we don't have member benefits. So normally, if you join something, you get. If there's a benefit for our members, it's just to say thank you and say, well, we've negotiated a discount at this holiday resort or something like that. But when we recruit members, we don't tell them join for this and this and this. Our focus is to sell our cause. So it's a donation. It's actually not a membership fee, and there's not a personal benefit. So people say, you know what? We believe there should be a strong watchdog that would be able to take on NERSA. If NERSA allows municipalities to unlawfully put up their tariffs, and we won that court case. They appealed, but in the end, if we win, the municipalities will have to pay back the money, as the EFF says, to those people that are overcharged. So those are the watchdog role that needs to be played by us.
There's political parties that sometimes seem to join and jump onto your bandwagon.
Yeah.
And if you're referring to the recent protest that happened, there were not only orange colors, there was also a blue color.
Yeah.
So do you find that other political parties are saying there's clearly some movement here, let's join in and become a part of these guys?
Well, we have a open stance that we also say to political parties. They all know that, is that we say we are not aligned to any specific political party. And the reason being for that is simple. We want to get things done. And we know that party politics divides people. If you want to start a neighborhood watch and you are aligned to a party, if you're going to on a patrol in the evening, then the ACDP guy would say, no, I'm not going to ride with you because you are the Freedom Front or DA or whatever. So we're a broad church in terms of our members voting for different political parties. But what we do is before every election, we call on our members to go and vote. But we don't tell them to go and vote. All we say is, if you were clever enough to join AfriForum, you're clever enough to decide who to vote for. But then in that sense, we try to build a understanding with political parties. I think the only one that there's not any form of understanding at the moment is the EFF, MK, but we have not, they knew, so we have not really engaged with them. We did, however, meet former President Zuma 8 times.
Oh, is it prior
in the
to
run-up?
MK?
Yeah, no, prior to his second term. During the run-up to his election and his first term, I think the things just hardened there when there was pressure starting to build on him. So we are willing to build a good relationship with everybody. And sometimes it's quite hard, especially if you take the ANCs as government to court to build that relationship.
True. You can't work with them on this side and then you're taking them to court on this side.
Yeah, but they know that. We've actually learned our strategies from the ANC. You just have to read their strategy and tactics document. You will see chapter 1 is always balance of forces. So they know, and we see also in terms of their reaction, also in the negotiations in 1994, on the one hand, they sat in the negotiations. On the other hand, they mobilized mass protests outside. While Afrikaans...
It's always confusing sometimes, but...
No, but it's not if you understand how politics work. If you're going to negotiate without a power base or a power leverage, you are not negotiating, you're begging. So that we've learned from the ANC. So that's also the way it works for us. Remember, I don't wake up in the morning and say, who am I going to fight with today? Sometimes I joke, say, no, that's how my wife wakes up. But that's not true.
Not you.
No, definitely. No, she's very kind. But,
I've met her. She is kind.
But what is true, if you work with the balance of forces, and I've already also said it to the ANC, you know what? We only play the rules of the game that you set. And there are many examples. I remember with regard to Paulo Jordan, when he was Minister of Arts and Culture, there was an issue of a name change of Pretoria. So,
interesting. When I read about you, that comes up quite strongly.
Yeah.
And you were still relatively young then. As
and slim. Yeah.
There you go.
So, but then we wrote to him and said, Mr. Minister, we want to... no, not Mr. Minister. Those days we thought he was doctor. So
different subject.
Different subject. So wrote to him, said, let's meet and speak about this. Got no reply. Wrote again, got no reply. Then we said, okay, well, now we must march to the minister's office.
Was it changing Tshwane or the street names?
No. It was this... remember, the Tshwane is the name of the metro and the city is Pretoria.
Yeah.
And then there was an effort to use the metro's name also for the city. But eventually that we got a solution that the city is still Pretoria and Tshwane is the metro. But then we had to march to his office, and then he wrote and said, well, we can meet. And we got to his office, he says, why did you have to march? Why didn't you just come and meet with me? I said, well, we wrote to you numerous times. The same was in many other, when we had a problem with the shooter Boer, Mr. Montash was negotiating on behalf of the ANC, and he said, why did you have to take us to court? And he said, no, we wrote to you. We wanted to speak to you. So that's unfortunately many of the protests or court cases is simply not to be ignored. And as soon as you get into the discussions, you can find some kind of a solution.
That's true.
It would be nice if I could sit and speak to the president and you think, Mr. President, you know, this is...
Don't you have access as AfriForum?
No, we have. But if I could say to him, Mr. President, you know, this BELA Act is not good. And he would say, you know what, now that you mention it, I think you're right. That won't happen.
But you do realize where you are with the BELA bill. And I don't want to start this discussion. Is that we're dealing with a bill, with now an act, that has been in Parliament for many years, in discussion for many years. It's been ironed out for many years, and now the final product is what we saw.
Yeah.
And now we can throw in GNU in the middle of all this discussion. It comes up as something that he feels as a president that maybe we need to relook at some stuff. What is your take on that? The fact that it's been through its natural course of a bill, and it ended up on his table, and he signed it into law.
Yeah. If we go, or hopefully, if and not when, if we go to court, one of our core arguments would be that the process was flawed. The vast majority of people was against the BELA Act, and we also saw that some of those inputs was not even considered. And then the second point, I think, is, remember, this is the 7th administration, not the 6th administration. The fact is the 6th administration changed the first administration's Schools Act.
Okay.
Because that Schools Act in 1996 also went through the processes, also went through consultation, and then it was decided, it was adopted in Parliament, signed and promulgated. Now the 6th administration said, no, we need to change that. And why should the 7th administration also not have the right to relook at things? If you're going to say if something gets through Parliament, it can never be changed, then we would have still had apartheid, because if then many acts would
still be in place.
Yeah, so that is not that you cannot say it is now static and can never change, and we have to do what we can to also be in the interest of all children, because just this morning I read an article in the newspaper with regard to this international test they do with grade 4s and grade 9s.
Grade 5. We came out of 59 schools, we came last.
Yes, and the question is why? Is it because people are not clever? Of course not. No. So the real issue here is, remember, Afrikaners, there was a Carnegie report that said these people are illiterate, socioeconomically they're doing bad. We were down in the dumps. And what helped us get out of there is mother tongue education, because especially maths and science, you can learn that much better in your mother tongue. And if you've mastered that, you can go and apply that knowledge in any other language. And if we really think that we had grade 5s writing, but it was a grade 4 exam. But you can imagine yourself, if you're in rural KwaZulu-Natal, English is a foreign language in your village. Then you get to school and, you have grade 1, 2, and 3, you have in your mother tongue. But then you're going to get to grade 4 and 5, and they want you to write in English a maths test. It's not a maths test, it's a language test. And
which has maths in it.
So that the cause for mother tongue education is a cause that I think is important to all, more so in rural communities, because in urban areas kids have more contact with English. But even so, my children, they speak English better than I do. But I can tell you, if they had to write their matric exam in English, they would have done much worse. Well, they did well, not worse and much worse, but they would have done badly. And if you think at the schools, half of the children that go into grade 1 never get to grade 12. So you're not going to eradicate these inequalities, even if you have legislation like affirmative action or BEE. It's not going to help. It's mother tongue education. So that is a strong cause that we drive. And to say, if you want to change an Afrikaans school language, we don't want our children to be taught in English.
Do you hear the argument sometimes that simply suggests that we're not changing the language of the school? We are giving the powers to change the language of the school to the department, to government. It's not saying we're changing the language. We're simply saying, and I put my name in there, I say we. I don't know why I say that, because I don't work for government. But the argument is it's a change of who approves the language. Not necessarily, it's taken away from the school governing body. And it's given to, because there are other factors, and those other factors are distance to school and things like that. Because with the change of the dynamics of our country, you have a kid that lives here whose school is a kilometer away, and it happens to be, and this is a black child, and this is an Afrikaans school, and they're saying there's 100 of us in this neighborhood, and we want to have the same access to the same school. What do you say to that argument if you were to look at it from that perspective?
No, I think that's a good argument. But let me just say, in terms of saying, well, it's not saying what we're going to do. It's just the opportunity that might be there for the head of department. But if you look at Mr. Lesufi and his MEC for education, Mr. Chiluane, they are quite adamant. Say there's not a place for a single medium Afrikaans school in Gauteng. They've decided that beforehand. Mr. Lesufi had a list when he was MEC of 127 schools whose language policy that he wanted to change. He went to Oeversval School that was full, and there were nearby 2 schools that had space, English schools, and he said to them that they should change their language. The court said, well, he overstepped totally. But in terms of that, we know what the intentions are of specifically here in Gauteng. So BELA is a loaded gun that is given to those people that want to destroy Afrikaans schools. With regard to access, why should it be that an English school is not a barrier to access? I live right across the road from an English school, and I can say, well, I want to put my child into this school.
And they should be taught in Afrikaans.
Yeah, and it's not going to happen. That's on the one side. So this access is, why should we not say to give people access that there must be an isiZulu school or a Setswana school? That's on the one side. Then in terms of the Afrikaans schools, I've had, the youngest one is still in school, but the 3 older ones went from primary through high school. And not once was there only a few black children in that school. There are a number of black children that go to Afrikaans schools that get accepted in Afrikaans schools like anybody else is accepted, and they are being taught in Afrikaans. So that on the other side, to say Afrikaans is a barrier but English not. How can the colonial language not be the barrier?
The argument can be you go to countries that were colonized by the French, and French is the language of choice. English has become a dominant language in our country. Look at the conversation we are having now. The audience that are likely to watch this, they will probably watch it because the medium of communication is English. It has dominated, whether we like it or not, with a gun. Probably there's a comedian that says a barrel of a gun that made English such a universal language. You can't avoid it.
No.
And it became the balancing factor. Whether we agree or not, whether we like that fact or not. And maybe that's why it is not exclusionary English, but Afrikaans can be to those that do not know how to say Uganet at all.
Yeah. Well, I can say Kinyaka Zamalek, but that's
of all things, Zamalek.
You have to.
We have to organize Zamalek before the end of this, and we can't ignore that.
No, just joking in that regard. Well, the thing is, I'm not saying children should not learn English. I think English is an international language. It is good to know that, but children are quite clever. It does not mean if they go to school in Setswana that they will not eventually be able to go to work in English. So that is the fallacy. But you say it's a balancing force. It's a imbalancing or unbalancing force, if I say so, because we put ourselves in competition with countries that do their business in their mother tongue. So the Western countries, America, the UK, you give them the home ground advantage.
You say we always give them the home ground advantage.
If you don't allow your children to be highly skilled to compete, so that's why I think it's something that we are harming our children through that. But just with regard to also other access. The argument is used if the demographics of a school, of a community changes, then a school should change. That is happening. And the Constitutional Court has actually laid the ground rules in this regard.
Okay.
You don't have to change the Schools Act. In Ermelo, the court said the demographics have changed. It means the school is not full of Afrikaans learners. There are empty spaces, and therefore you cannot say, well, we're just going to keep all this extra space to ourselves. And the court said that is not just, and I agree with that. you cannot deny people access if you have ample place.
Of course.
But if a school is full, and there are health regulations to see how when a school is full, then we say then nobody should be able to tell that school change your language policy because you're not going to accommodate. So then what is the solution? There is a backlog of schools. And Mr. Lesoufi, under his tenure as MEC, there were 9 less schools when he ended his term as when he started. There were 340,000 more children. So you had less schools, more children. And now you want to make the Afrikaans schools the scapegoat. So in our discussions that we had with government as well as the ruling party, we're quite strong to say there should be an obligation on government to provide access by building schools because Afrikaans schools are less than 5% of schools in the country. Now you have 80% dysfunctional schools. You have a lack of classroom space. You're not going to solve it
with the 5%.
With the 5%. So, but what we're against, no racial discrimination. If any school discriminates on the grounds of race, action should be taken against them. But as I've said, when I spoke to the president also in that, it's not as if I speak to him every day. I just had that
1 minute.
1 minute.
Okay, there you go.
So I invited him to say, you choose any public Afrikaans school. I'm not going to manipulate. And we go to that school. You'll see it's not exclusive. So it's a fallacy that Afrikaans is exclusive. I think there are people that has a political agenda, and BELA is going to give them a loaded gun.
So there's an issue of self-reliance that comes across a lot when you read up on information related to AfriForum. Self-reliance and what is this, community federalism and all of that. And the concept of self-reliance, it dates back to apartheid days of we build our own community and we live in our own community. What is self-reliance and what does it mean in the context of AfriForum? And does it even exist?
Yeah. Well, self-reliance, I think, is quite the opposite of apartheid. And let me give you just
educate me.
Yeah, well, I can't. I don't want to say educate, but in terms of how I understand history. When after the Anglo-Boer War, when the British colonized the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic and the Orange Free State, and you had British rule until 1910, but effectively also to much later when
1940s
the Queen was the king, and then the Queen was state head. You had the Afrikaners to say, because remember the government then, even though there were Afrikaners was an English-orientated government. They said, well, we have to start looking after ourselves, not reliant on government. And you had AfBop, today something totally different, but it was actually a kind of stokvel at churches.
An Afrikaner stokvel.
Yeah, people were poor, and at churches, congregations, they said, let's all give a little bit of money, so if somebody dies, we are able to bury them. And that started growing into a community business. Then I said, well, this works, let's start a bank, Volkskas. And we didn't say, well, Barclays, we want to take over the English bank. We said, no, we'll start our own.
Then PS Insurance is started under the same principle.
Yes, and you have a number of others. You know, Afrikaans said Mutual and Federal, no, we're not going to take over that. We're going to build Sanlam and Santam. So you had all that history of self-reliance, starting your community organizations. What happened in apartheid was totally different. Afrikaners became government reliant. if you have a problem, just call the member of parliament and they'll sort it out for you. And the whole Afrikaner society became dependent on the two parties, the National Party, the governing party, and then you had the split, the Conservative Party, and each of them had their own women's group, their own youth group, their own cultural group, parallel, but all these organizations were dependent on government. And that weakened the Afrikaner community quite a lot. So after 1994, when the National Party and Conservative Party disappeared, those organizations that were connected to them, most of them collapsed or became very small. And we are going actually back to our roots to say we should, as communities, take responsibility for ourselves. And as I've mentioned just now, it's not something that is foreign to our fellow African peoples in this country. Vuk'uzenzele is something well known.
The concept of stokvel in the township is very strong. So that concept is there, it exists. Yeah.
And if you look at it practically, many people, especially to the left, think the government should have the solution for everything. Government should do this and government should do that. It would be great if it could happen. I would like it also if government can do it.
You won't be necessary.
Yeah. Yes, I would like that. But the problem is we have limited resources in the country. Even if there is a political will from government to say, now we're going to help everybody, it's not possible. So what you can do is to say, let's let communities take responsibility for themselves. And it's not a political concept. It's just the community saying, let's work together. And that you can have in a community say, let's look after our safety.
But how do you do it practically? And I don't want you to use safety as an example because it's a common example of police forums and all of that. And these safety and security forums. Give me a different example of how practical can self-reliance, and I imagine it's community federalism. Yeah. How does it really work in today's South Africa of Nelson Mandela?
Well, let's take the project we're planning in KwaZulu-Natal. You have a number of subsistence farmers growing mealies because not a lot of technology is used. The grade of the mealies is not always high, but there's nothing wrong. It's good to eat. Then they take that and take it to some agricultural business, the silos, to sell it to them. And because the grade is low, they get less money than what it costs them to transport it. So now we say, okay, these farmers cannot rely on those business. They work on another principle. So what can this community do for themselves? And the concept is you can get a small mill, much smaller. You don't have to have this huge mill. You can have these small subsistence farmers working together. They can mill their mealies there. They can then don't have to give it to a big shop to sell. They can informal trade, sell it, and then they have food security, but there's also food security in the community. And that is probably another concept of the most basic concept of community self-reliance, not waiting for businesses elsewhere, using the buying power, the expertise within that community. There can also be other examples. Let's say in terms of welfare, if it says it takes a village to raise a child, that is community self-reliance, if I can use that term. If you look at the poor in say, for instance, the community I live in, somebody needs to just do a broad study. What is the socioeconomic situation? And then we say, okay, there are churches, there are schools with feeding programs, there are other welfare organizations. How can we coordinate this to be able to help to look at our poor. That is self-reliance. It does not mean it won't be appreciated if you get help from government. But so if all communities do that, and that is why we also did not go to the communities we have agreements with, the traditional communities, to say we want an agreement with you. There's always somebody standing up saying, we want to take this community forward. And then they speak to us and say, we want to work together to do this. Interestingly enough, it's mostly females in communities that says they want to do it. In the Amabeli community, it was Princess BELA Mabandla that started saying, well, we need to do this. She speaks to embassies and does a lot of work to get those projects running. And I think that would be good for all. It's not isolation. In fact, if you have a number of strong communities around the country, there can be cooperation.
Something that stands out, though, about AfriForum and the concept of self-reliance and all of that is that it feels like it has a very strong tinge of white minority self-reliance. Correct me.
Now, if you go and look at any suburb, people will know how suburbs look. Those suburbs are not exclusively white. The Group Area Act is gone. And if you say in that community, we're going to have a neighborhood watch, you don't say, okay, you're not allowed to be part of this neighborhood watch. We have here in the East Rand, there's a Indian community that formed the AfriForum neighborhood watch to do that. If we fix a pothole in a suburb, we're not saying, we don't put the sign up, only Afrikaners can drive over this pothole. So I think these communities are geographical, and in a sense, the benefit is for everybody living there, and you don't exclude people. Of course, we're not paternalistic. I can go into Vira Park because there's a lot of Afrikaners living there and make a proposal, and people will do that. You can imagine if I now go into to Atteridgeville and say, listen, Kallie Kriel is here. I've got your solutions for you. That would be paternalistic. It's Afrikaners in the apartheid system thought they knew what was best for everybody. Those guys are gone.
Were they right?
No. No, we are humble in our approach. So if a community comes to us, such as I've mentioned Barlong Busaleka, then we also say, well, we don't have all the answers because we don't. But we have a secret weapon, and that is that we are willing and determined. So in that sense, that cooperation can be much broader than just Afrikaans-speaking people.
You've been described as Afrikaner nationalist group. Do you agree with the statement?
No, definitely not. We are an Afrikaner cultural group, but
sounds like you're going to start dancing and singing.
No, but culture is much broader than that. But
I've met a Zulu cultural group. And they were wearing and they were dancing. I'm being funny.
No. So no, definitely not. I think people are being mischievous in that regard because they forget what nationalist groups are. It's groups that hate others more than they love themselves. We want to be confident and be proud of who we are, but we are also reaching out. We are also functioning within the rules of the game, within the bounds of the Constitution. People forget that at one stage there were people planting bombs and all these things. That is not our route. That is not the route we are saying. We are saying we want to build a prosperous society, but where peace prevails.
Not exclusively Afrikaner, peaceful, prosperous society.
No, because as I've mentioned just now, as Anton Rupert, not Johan Rupert, his father, the one that started the business, said, you cannot sleep at night if your neighbor is hungry. And we realize that. But I think people need to understand, many think that, okay, if you focus on issues that are of importance to you, the other things aren't. We like... not like a man, we like a woman. We can do more than one thing at a time. And it's not mutually exclusive.
I like the example of you cannot sleep if your neighbor is hungry. It's an example I hear very often. Let's stay with that for a minute and talk about South Africa, because South Africa is exactly that example. When you are a guy that has boerewors pap and chakalaka, and your neighbors haven't had a meal in 5 days. What do you do in a context like that? And I will be aware, as you're telling the example, as you're telling your answer, you're also multiplying the practical application of your answer. What do you do in a scenario like that when your neighbor hasn't eaten and you have all the food?
Yeah.
Which is what South Africa is.
Yeah. Now I'm actually have to divert to or go to a cliche, that says... if you give a man a fish, he'll eat for one day. If you give him a fishing rod, he'll eat for longer. So I think what we can do is to make a positive contribution in large areas. If you look at, we need international investment. So how do we get that? We need to address the safety situation. That is where we are involved. You need to make sure that the infrastructure is sound to get that we are involved with. We had a meeting with the Director General of Water and Sanitation, as well as the Deputy Minister there, saying what role can we play in that regard. So I think if we make a positive contribution to get a society that works, then it will also help the economy. But the best thing I could do, if I had the power to do so, I don't. But the best way is to empower people through education. And the way to do that is to start with mother tongue education. And if I was president, which I'm fortunately never going to be, and I don't want to be,
You'd be surprised.
That would be my first focus, to say, and that was also the Afrikaner poverty problem was solved through education. A huge focus on education, and that is a way to help. So we can promote that idea. And play a role in all other spheres where possible.
And correct if the statement is right, you've been quoted as AfriForum saying that apartheid was not crime against humanity.
Yes.
The UN has said that, and many other forums have said apartheid was crime against humanity. What exactly is your stance in that regard?
Yes, maybe I can also mention that I was taken to the Equality Court with regard to that by Andile.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and what was found in that case, and I have the judgment and I send it to anybody that wants to see it. The judge found that I in no way tried to justify apartheid. The judge found that I in fact condemned apartheid because it infringed on the dignity of black people. And the judge also found that I was interrupted by the interviewer without being able to state my case. Okay, that being said, did I say those words? Yes, I said it, and I wanted to explain, but I couldn't get the chance. But
You'll get it here.
Now's the chance.
Yeah.
If you ask me now, is apartheid a crime against humanity? It is. You had the Rome statute that was accepted, which has an article and says it is a crime against humanity. But if people ask you, was apartheid a crime against humanity? There are two facets about that. It sounds legalistic, but it's actually a moral question.
Sure.
But it's a legalistic question.
Absolutely.
So,
and the minute it becomes a legalistic question, it means it has to be proven to be a crime. But carry on.
Yeah, but I'll never answer it like that again. Okay. I would say, yes, it is a crime against humanity. Rome Statute says it. Then I would ask, is it a legalistic question or a moral question? If it's a moral question, I can say apartheid was wrong because it infringed on the dignity of people. If you ask, was it a crime against humanity in a legalistic sense? In 1948, and remember, the crime is in terms of the international law of the time. You cannot charge me now for something when the law only came later. So a legalistic answer was, and that was the point I was trying to make, because I don't think my ancestors were criminals. They made huge mistakes. But within the world views of that time, remember the US had the separate but equal Jim Crow laws and all those kind of things in the US. The British aren't the angels that they portray themselves to be. So that was in terms of the time frame. At that stage, it was not a crime against humanity. Only in 1973 that happened. But this is, again, something that is used by opponents as ours to say, well, they are trying to justify apartheid. We don't justify apartheid in any way.
However, it is your recollection of apartheid. I don't know your age, but you're old enough to know it. You were here when it happens. Same here. I was young enough to have observed it. What is your perspective and recollection of apartheid, just as an individual?
Well, I think in terms of, I would have had a totally different experience than you would have had, of course. In a sense that you were actually living in a secluded kind of society where you did not really, well, I can't say you did not know, but within a worldview, my parents were good people. They showed respect towards black people. But looking back, and remember you also develop with time.
Of course.
If you look back today, it would be a paternalistic
relationship.
Paternalistic goodness. So, but I will never condemn my father, because in terms of how he saw life, he was actually proud of how good he looked after the people that worked for him.
Okay.
But in a sense, now we can say that was paternalistic, give somebody old clothes. How people think they're doing well. So I think in a sense, the paternalism is something that I can remember and experience. What I also remember as a child is we stayed in Pretoria. The first time I found out about the conflict was when the Church Street bomb exploded.
Okay.
And
when is that? 80s?
Yeah, the 80s,
yes, yeah.
So then, I didn't want to go to town anymore because, so that was also something that I experienced during that time. And then the one thing that was negative on our family is my father was a pastor and not a reverend. So we were in the church that they clap and
tap, yes.
And in terms of the old Afrikaans establishment, people that were in a Pentecostal church were seen as a sect. You had to be in the NG Kerk, Gereformeerde of Hervormde Kerk. So that I remember, we were the outsiders. But that was good for my development, because when the new dispensation came, it was not a hard thing for me to be seen as the outsiders again.
It wasn't a shock.
Yeah, it wasn't a shock. So, so that was good growing up. But a pity is that even though it was for a smaller community, things worked in a sense, and one would have just wanted to expand that without things deteriorating as we see.
Do you think over the years, and I'm asking you this as a personal experience, you got to understand apartheid from a black person's perspective? Do you think you probably never will? However, you have a sense of it. Do you think over the years, as a leader of AfriForum, you got to get a sense of exactly what apartheid was for a black person?
Yes, well, I think it would be wrong of me to say, no, I understand totally, because it would be quite arrogant to say that. But I remember my father telling me he only died probably 20 years into the new dispensation. Yeah. And he told me a story that when he was 8 years old, they lived in Bethlehem, and in those days there was the aandklok reël.
What is that?
It's in the evening, 9 o'clock.
Okay.
If you're black, you have to be out of town.
Yes, of course.
What's it? A bell ringing at
physical bell.
Yeah, well, I just know they called it the aandklok reël. I wasn't there, of course. But then if you were a black person being outside after 9, you had to write, they had to have a letter saying, getting permission to be there. And my grandparents weren't at home. And then my father was 8 years old, and he had to write a letter to say she can go out. So when my father told me that, he said, this was terrible that could have happened.
You had to write a letter and
giving her permission
to an older black person.
Yes,
and he was only 8 years old.
Yes, so those kind of things I understand, but also my father realized. But I think the realization of not infringing on the dignity of people, I think in time Afrikaners became to realize that, and that's why apartheid was. There was support for apartheid to be dismantled. But the question is, what should I do now in terms of that history? I cannot change it, and I want my children to stay here. So I now have to say these are realities that we can deal with, but I don't want my children to be the victims of that. So we are trying to find a solution. How do we build a future on a basis of mutual recognition and respect going forward? But I'm not one of those people who say, get over it, let's look forward. No, there's a cliche.
But you do know there are people who say that.
Or they say, my children as black friends. We're not racist. Those cliches we long past.
We were not there.
Yeah.
You also hear, we were not there. Yeah. Those are ancestors that did that. Why are you blaming us? So you have people who say that.
Yeah, but I think one should, in terms of history, the thing of history, if you look at history, is not to judge somebody by today's standards, because it differs. And in 100 years' time, people would look at us and say, can you believe what these people did? So you're acting within, you're a child of your time. It doesn't make it an excuse, not at all. But so we don't have to try and defend history, but I try to understand why would people have done these things. But okay, that's a long discussion to be had.
Do you, however, understand that as much as it's history, it would inherently carry itself over, because history doesn't stop, and then new life starts.
Yeah.
Some of the things that happened historically, there's a huge tree outside in my yard, which probably 60 years old, long before I was here. The very building we're in was built in the 70s when this community was built. Long before I even thought I'll ever be in this environment. So I'm benefiting from that history. Do you understand, though, how there would be history that overlaps to a future generation?
Yeah.
And that's what inheritance is about. It's the hard work of an old man that leaves things for their children. South Africans will still make reference to history in relation to issues like land and education that was denied other kids. And they would even make an example and say, well, we're competing today for the same job with a kid that had way better education than me, 10 years ahead of me, 20 years ahead of me. When you hear such realities, like land being an issue, the redistribution of land, what is your perspective in trying to balance back that history?
Well, I think in terms of balancing, we need to look at the best way to measure inequalities. And the best way to measure that is poverty. Because the most of poor people would be black, but they would benefit because they are poor, not that they are black. And you would also have a few Afrikaners or number of Afrikaners that are poor that would also benefit. And let me tell you in terms of my history, my father was a handyman and never worked for government, did not save for a pension. So when my mother was old, we as the children had to fund them until the day they died. And we inherited nothing. Are there many Afrikaners that have generational wealth? Of course, many of them. But if we simply say, well, if you're an Afrikaner, you have generational wealth, that cannot be true because in my case, it was not true. But then also to say, if you are black today, you are disadvantaged now. And that's not always the case. And if you don't look at poverty as a mechanism, the poor people will not be helped anyway, because those that would be able to make use of the opportunity are those that are well equipped to do so. If you look at, for instance, the Springbok rugby team, the black people that play there were all in private schools or former Model C schools.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if you're going to, I say, if they want a quota in the school rugby, don't say we need so many black children, because then you'll just go to the private schools. Say we need to pick 5 children from schools in poor areas
that show potential.
That show potential. Yeah. That is, then you'll uplift, because the straight race number counting leads not to taking on the problem where it really lies. If you want to make sure that sport is representative, if you're just going to say, well, we need so many black players, what would happen? The province would say, well, we need some black players, let's buy some from the Western Cape.
Bring them over.
The wings are very fast, bring them over. And then it would say, okay, if our numbers are right, everything is fine. But if you say, well, you have to go make sure that there is enough facilities, that there is good coaching, then you're going to uplift. So I think that's why our view is use poverty as the measure and not race.
Do you, as AfriForum, what is your position on the land issue, for example? Yeah. And I say position because you can answer this from any angle. There's a political position, and there's a parliamentary position that's been pending for a while, land distribution without compensation, for example. Yeah. But as we stand today, in December of 2024, what is AfriForum saying about issues of land and the redistribution of that land?
We are in favor of land restitution.
Okay.
It means if somebody can prove that they were on a piece of land and they were forcibly removed. Somebody has taken it over. I think it's logical. Then there should be restitution in that regard, and we support that. With regard to expropriation without compensation, the thing is, many people that now have land, there are few farms left where you have a fifth or sixth or seventh generation on a farm. Most of them are people that have bought it new, or you have companies that have bought up quite a lot of land. And, if I last year bought land and say, well, this land was taken without good cause, now you have to give it back. So you're punishing people that weren't involved there. But should there be restitution? Yes. What has gone wrong with restitution? There are a few things. The lack of capacity, corruption that has happened. And also the third thing is that many people decided to rather take money than the farm. I think it's 94%, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
People said, give me the money. And
instead of the land.
Yeah. And then you now see, okay, nothing has changed, but there has been compensation for that. In terms of corruption, there are numerous examples where somebody bought the land and then, especially in Mpumalanga, and then sold it to government for much larger sums, and it was politically connected people. All land was given to families of people in politics that were connected. So that process, unfortunately, was riddled with corruption. The government has more than 4,000 farms that are not given to people. And there's a difference. You see, the land reform at the moment is not giving title deeds to black people. And what is the implications of that? You can look at government's own figures on how many of these projects fail. Is it because black people can't farm? No, it's black people have been for many centuries in Africa, has been self-reliant, small-scale farming, cattle.
Even after the Afrikaner took the land, they still worked for them.
Yes,
so farming is not a new concept for black people.
The problem is if they don't have title deeds, you're setting up people for failure because you cannot get funding to buy the input costs. And also, if you don't have a mentorship, if you're going to put me on a farm now, I struggle to grow a tomato in my backyard. I will fail dismally. So I think the focus on race and simply redistributing without focusing on the other aspects creates a situation where this fails. There are also at any stage a lot of farms that are available to be bought. But that happens many times. If government fails, they have to get the scapegoat and then make the farmers the scapegoat because of their own lack of success.
Do you, however, understand, I don't expect you to, EFF's position of wrong was done and it has to be corrected. And land was taken from a family and that family did not keep record of that event. They didn't have a camera to take a picture of people when they were taking. They cannot prove at all. But they know my great-granddad, I was born here. And then I was moved. There's just no physical proof. And I asked this question because in my conversation with Patricia de Lille, no, I lie. It's not even Patricia de Lille. It's who's the leader of the DA? How can I forget her name?
Helen Ziller.
Helen Ziller. Yeah. How can I forget Helen Ziller's name? In my discussion with Helen Ziller, she says exactly the same line. She says, if you can prove that the land was taken from you, you should get it back. My family cannot prove that. It's just not physically possible. What do we do then?
Well, I think one should balance the alternatives. You're now going to take land from somebody that bought it now. And if you're going to go the EFF route, would it benefit those that get the land? Unfortunately, we do not have to go far. We can see what the consequences are. If you go into Zimbabwe, that program of land redistribution, even if it had good intentions, the people that were focused on to benefit are the people that have now been negatively affected the most. If you look at the 90% unemployment rate in Zimbabwe, if you look at Venezuela, how that country has deteriorated. So we know what the consequences are. So even if the EFF have portray it as being nice, we know that that would destroy the country, not only to the detriment of Afrikaners, but the detriment of all. And we must remember there are only probably more or less 30,000 farmers. The vast majority of Afrikaners are urbanized. In terms of our membership base, only a small number of them are on farms. So this smaller concept will actually have an impact in cities, in the country as a whole. So that's why we should be very wary of that kind of solution, and make sure that restitution, that we focus on that. And also, then for people that don't have land, such as myself, there should be other opportunities. I have opportunities because I got a good education. And then we should make sure that good education would be more beneficial than any kind of land. You cannot eat land. You have to be able to utilize that land. And that you can do if you're skilled.
But I can do whatever I want with it, even if it's mine. It's my land. I can choose to do, if I choose to just look at it every day and appreciate it, it's my land. What I do with it should not be anyone's problem, in my opinion. As long as I got my land back. Is there an issue with that? Because there is a narrative that continues to say land must be used. And I say part of using it is just looking at it and enjoying it.
Yeah. Well, I think the biggest portion of the country is land that is not being used.
Yes.
If you drive
anywhere
through KwaZulu-Natal the other day, I went through the Eastern Cape. There's a lot of land available. So it's not a lack of land. It's a lack of ability to utilize the land.
Yeah. South African politics, and I changed the subject completely. South African politics have seen interesting dynamics and changes. We're now dealing with GNU. And I don't know if this creates any different environment for an organization like yourselves as AfriForum. But where do you find yourself in today's narrative of a government of national unity?
Well, I think there is the possibility that it can have a very positive effect in terms of international confidence in the country, bringing in new investment. So that can be a good consequence. But we are not naive. The government of national unity should not be seen as something that should be kept intact at all costs. If, for instance, the BELA Act is going through, it means that this worst act in terms of what any government can do to Afrikaans-speaking community is implemented by a government of national unity.
Yes.
So it means that what the ANC has effectively done is simply to co-opt the DA and the Freedom Front and the IFP to implement their policies. Then I would rather have a situation of a government that I know exactly what the intentions are and not co-opting parties that many of our members vote for. So I'm positive about the government of national unity. It has also opened up for us opportunities to enter into the discussions. If you said to me a few years ago that I would have a discussion with the minister from the PAC. I would not have thought it would be possible.
Have you had a conversation with them?
Yes, and we also had a braai.
Wow, look at that.
With Minister Nyontsu. But even in that regard, there can be common ground found. And the common ground in his specific situation, he's the Minister of Land Reform, but also Rural Development, which is something that's very important to us. So many of the traditional communities don't own their land. It's only the Ngonyama Trust, because of the negotiations before 94, it is in the hands of the Zulu people. But if you look at the Amabele community or the Barlong Buseleka, that land is owned by government and not by the community. It makes it harder for them to also get investment in their land because they don't own it. So I think the minister would probably, I think, it sounds like that, would want to make sure that land is being given to black communities, and there is somewhere where we agree to give the traditional communities their land, give them the ownership, then they will be able to utilize it more effectively.
GNU is an unstable relationship. It's like being in a relationship with someone that threatens to leave you every chance they get. We see that all the time. And when you don't put enough sugar in their tea, they threaten to leave. Do you think, when you're looking at it, that it represents something that can last long?
Well, I think if there's a willingness from both groupings, or multi-party groupings, to make it work, it is possible. You use the example of a relationship. If one party says, well, I want to leave
all the time,
then the other party can just say, why is that? Is there not something we can do to try and accommodate?
But the other one can also say, you can leave. You can't make me live like this all the time.
Yeah, but that you say after you've given some effort to it. You don't do it after the first year of marriage.
So where we are now, GNU is in the first few months of marriage.
Yeah, so I think all parties involved should work hard and should recognize each other's constituencies. I think that is, if you look at the balance of forces, strategy and tactics, you must also know it's about constituencies. And all parties need to know our partner will have to sell this to their constituency, and the other party should know this party should sell it. And if you have that attitude, you're always able to find a win-win solution.
It's very tricky, though.
Yeah, not everybody is going to be a winner, but everybody would lose more or less the same amount. So
it's where we are. We can bring in, because the most pertinent, confrontation, I'll call it that, or misalignment of the GNU is the BELA.
Yes.
Is one example. There are many that are coming. But this is the one that we're dealing with now. Already, there's such huge differences. As you earlier in our conversation, you spoke about polar opposites. There are polar opposites when it comes to this subject. And you end up with a situation where it takes too long to get to the final point because we are discussing. An example I use often, when children are hungry, you don't spend time discussing how to feed them. You feed them and then discuss how to feed them again the next time. And I worry that we might find ourselves in a situation where conversations take too long and solutions, because South Africa is an emergency. It's not we can take our time to decide. What do we do then in a situation where the polar opposites of conversation takes longer to implement solutions? This is where we are.
I think many of the issues are also internal problems in parties. Otherwise, we can move faster. We've had negotiations with the ANC directly from the Solidarity Movement side. And I think we came to very good solutions. But the reason that was stalled is that you have these internal factions within the ANC that use this to fight their their own battles. You see, there are some that aren't happy with regard to the GNU.
Of course.
And now, unfortunately, the BELA Act has become
a tool
in their hands to try and destroy the government of national unity. So it's not really about the BELA Act anymore. So there should also be internally in parties mechanisms to make sure that they can move faster. Otherwise, that's the only reason why these discussions are stalling. A solution could have been found long ago if there was not those internal forces within the ANC.
Quick question. What do you think of Orania?
Well, Orania depends on what how you look at Orania. If you look at it as a whites-only enclave, then of course...
which is what it is.
No, I don't necessarily agree with that.
I must tell you, I read a book on Orania, and this was done by a researcher, someone who spent days there. It's a black person who asked for permission to spend time in Orania and did extensive research, engaging with people who live there. It's an Afrikaner exclusive neighborhood. Based on the findings, it's not necessarily a place where anyone can live there, and I can't just go there and want to bathe and live there. You have to apply, you have to fill in a form, you have to be allowed, you have to be interviewed, you have to be assessed, and all of that. A person of my color will get an immediate no. That's why I ask from that perspective.
Yeah, well, I think racial discrimination is not acceptable in any form, but I think if we look at our country as a whole, there are literally hundreds of traditional communities. The Nkungumati community, and you'll know, you can mention them. And if the media goes there, they do not say, this is a blacks-only enclave, the Nkungumati community. They would say, this is a traditional Zulu community. And in that sense, I view communities with a cultural character not as something foreign to the country. But if you're going to portray it and say this is just white, so we can bring Portuguese and English speakers, as long as you're white, you can live here, then that's a racial project. So if it's a cultural project, which I believe it is.
You believe Orania is a cultural project?
I believe so. Yeah, well, I've been there, and in terms of, it's actually the total opposite of what apartheid was. Apartheid said, well, we can use cheap black labor, but after they've worked, they must go outside of town, go and live elsewhere, and don't vote. So you built a false baskap, if I can say, through black labor. And people that are sincere to say we want to build a community where Afrikaners can have a say in terms of, because they're a minority everywhere. And so, but we cannot abuse black people to say work here, but you can't vote.
You work here, but you can't live here.
Yeah. So the sacrifice people do there is to say, well, we're going to do the jobs, the refuse removal, the cutting of grass. People don't have domestic workers, those kind of things. So that's totally different from apartheid. So my view is that is an example of a self-sufficient cultural community, which we can have elsewhere as well. I know they have agreements with a number of other cultural communities, so there's not isolation. But again, it depends on how you look at it. If it's one of many cultural villages, then it would be fine. If it's a racist project, it will not be fine.
I understand Orania in particular. The book helped me grasp it a lot better. And until I got to the Apartheid Monument, until I got to the Verwoerd museum. And I said, it sounds like there's a celebration of a history that South Africans would rather forget. What do you say to that?
Yes, no, I know I don't know, there's not a apartheid
It's
museum.
not, no, it's a Verwoerd.
Yeah,
Yes.
Verwoerd.
Yeah.
I think the founder, Professor Karel Boshoff, Dr. Verwoerd was his father-in-law. So I think that
comes with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I think if the town wants to be successful, it needs to break totally with any form of apartheid. But let's see what happens. I know people that stay there that are good people, that are not racist people, that are willing to work hard for an Afrikaner community. But let's see what happens. I don't think the community troubles anybody. And that community, I also know that there are also communities in the vicinity that can be uplifted. And I think that model, if one says we can duplicate this model elsewhere, it might be of good use to the country as well.
You are involved with the city of Tshwane in some form. What is your relationship with Tshwane?
Well, we have a memorandum of understanding signed by the previous coalition that was in charge. But that memorandum of understanding is still in place today. The memorandum means that we are not paid for any work we do. It is just in terms of a community. How it works with AfriForum, we don't go into a community and do the work. We facilitate. So if you have members of a community to say, you know what, we want to cut the grass in our community, we will facilitate, give advice. If they say we want to fix potholes, we will give them the know-how how to do it. So, but what happened in the past, it would have been hard because now you want to fix a pothole, but the municipality doesn't like it if you do that.
It doesn't like it if you do it on your own without their mandate or permission.
No. Beforehand, they would just say, you're not allowed to do that.
Okay.
You get that. So this agreement is that we can, that the municipality is open for us to do these things, but we cannot just move in. We still have to write to them and say, we want to do this. Actually, as we're speaking now, the meeting I had before we're speaking was with the Dr. Moya, which is the executive mayor, as well as the deputy executive mayor, on speaking how can we look at the issues that people are not happy with. And I think there's a lot of misperceptions that it would have given us access to
resources,
to infrastructure.
That's what they say.
Yeah, but that is not true. To get access to infrastructure, we would have had to get permission. But there are also, unfortunately, people that think we get access to resources, as you've mentioned.
Maybe that's why, that's the phrase I used.
Yeah, and we say, no, we don't get paid. So it's actually funny. We want to cut grass without payment, and then there are people saying, no, you shouldn't do that. Yeah. But I think sanity will prevail. We had a very constructive discussion, and we hope to continue to do that work in the Tshwane Metro.
What type of country do you dream of as AfriForum? And I ask this question, and I want you to firmly put the AfriForum head on your head. Which is that of also a group of Afrikaners that you feel are a minority in the system. What kind of country do you dream of?
Well, I dream of a country that's a community of communities, or to say it as the Constitution says it, unity in diversity, where it is fine to have institutions, cultural institutions, to have mother tongue education, but a country where there's mutual recognition and respect amongst communities. And remember, you don't have to like something that somebody else does or agree with it. let's take, for instance, land ownership. Traditional communities work with communal land. I believe personally that it should be individual ownership, and you have to have title deeds. But mutual recognition and respect means that I don't go into a traditional community and say, you know what, people,
You're wrong.
You're wrong, change it. And that is something that has been built over hundreds of years.
That's true.
So when we, for instance, cooperate with traditional communities, we don't say change land ownership. We say, how does land ownership work? How within this framework can we cooperate to make it work? And sometimes people might say, yes, these Afrikaners, you know what is this issue with language with them? So people, you don't even have to like it, just respect it. And I think if we can get to a point of really respecting even things that you don't like, that's when we'll have the society that we need. There are many things I don't like, but
Of course.
There are people that those things are dear to them. And if I can respect that and then also ask for the same for myself, then there would be a future for my children in this country.
As we conclude, why do you do this? Why? It almost, when I listen to you, because you started when there was nothing.
Yeah.
And you continue to do this. You could have done anything with your life. Why do you do this? Why does it matter to you to be a leader of a movement such as yours?
Yeah, I believe in the whole concept in history that there's a contract between the current generation and those that came before them and those that are yet to be born. And for me, even if I sit in an old age home one day, I would want to sit back and say, listen, I played a role, or AfriForum played a role to bring a better future for those to come. And that is actually quite satisfying. I think if I had a normal job, just going there today and see how much money can I make for the shareholders, that would not have excited me. But this whole thing that you can see something that's wrong and you're able to do something about it, and you're able to make a bigger difference. That is what I believe life is about.
What is it about your history and your childhood that has turned you into that person that you just described?
Well, I think in terms of history, at home we learned a lot about history. So you started to respect the sacrifices that people had to make. You know, if you did not want to stay under the English in 1838, and you can imagine leaving your home, just taking a wagon, moving elsewhere.
Not knowing where you're going.
Yeah. What kind of sacrifices that would have been. But you can look in all cultural communities that there have been people making huge sacrifices. So if you have respect for history and culture, it gives you a sense that you want to preserve that, and then make sure you play the same role, that somebody in future can say, listen, look at the sacrifices
that he made.
Well, it's not just about me, but more the community and AfriForum as an organization.
What is the structure of AfriForum? So you are CEO, and then what happens below that?
Yeah, we NGO, non-profit organization. So we have a board of 8 people. And then we have 11, we have a forum, a managing forum of 4 people. But then we have a forum of heads of the organization, 11 of them, looking at culture, looking at environmental issues, looking at safety, looking at private prosecution. We actually try and cover a wide spectrum of issues.
What major success have you can point at as having been with AfriForum for so many years? and say that we did that? What comes to mind almost immediately?
Well, the Nestle
Yes.
thing was a big deal.
Yeah.
Also, then in terms of the Pretoria name, that I think is for me is a big deal. And then the fact that we have branches in places that I didn't even know exist. Sometimes I hear of a branch in some suburb that I didn't even know was there. So to be able to actually just be a catalysator for things to happen in places, I think that is good. But the cherry on this matter would be if the BELA issue can be solved, then I can retire and give it. We have many young people there.
Yes.
I'm actually the old man
Jeez.
there, so they can take this forward one day, and that gives me confidence that it won't end when I retire.
Getting Kriel was a big deal.
Yes,
Not necessarily one of your brightest moments as an organizer, but it was a big deal to get someone of such stature to be a part of your organization.
No, that was a mistake for me not mentioning that. You see, I'm getting old, so I can't remember.
Well, look at me, I mentioned this.
Yeah. No, Harry was a good step forward for us. And it also, it's in terms of community saying we can do something about things that are wrong. The criminal justice system is something that is failing all people today. And we have to try and do something about that. It's just a drop that it's not huge. We don't have 1,000 prosecutors, but I think with the team we have there, I think we are making inroads and moving towards the right direction.
What big case are you in now besides the BELA? Are you actually actively involved with the BELA as a legal matter?
Yes, well, if it's not solved, then we will go to court. Okay. The NERSA one is an important one for us in terms of electricity tariffs. But we at any given stage we have about 200 cases in various phases.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think the BELA is probably the most important one at the moment. And of course, the Senzo Mahiwa case is still ongoing. But
you're still actively involved with that case?
Yes, Kriel has been appointed on behalf of the family to represent them. But remember, we're not prosecuting, so we are just monitoring that.
Yeah.
But we are confident. Remember, the first 5 years, there were no arrests. When Harry became involved, after a year, we saw the arrest. And there are very many theories of people saying, no, it's the Twala son that did it.
And because it happened so publicly, trust me, your opinion is mine, yours is as good as anybody else's.
So, but we believe the right people have been arrested, although not all of them. There is one, the mastermind. I think people will know who she is. We can't understand why she's not arrested. There is statements by the accused that links her. There is telephone records that links her. So it's unfortunate that she is not brought to book, but at least there are people that are in the dock, and we believe that they will be held accountable.
It's an interesting case because it happens so publicly. It's like watching a never-ending movie.
Yeah, but it's time for it to end so that we can see justice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Do you know, would you, as we conclude, would you, looking at the work of AfriForum and what you're able to achieve, would you look at South Africa and say there's a lot more of your type of organizations that are needed in this society?
Yes.
And why would you say that?
Well, I think a community lives through structures. If you don't have structures, you're unorganized, and then you can achieve nothing. Everybody is just running in their own direction. So especially, I think a bigger impact than AfriForum nationally is our local branches in communities, because they on the ground, they are able to coordinate, they are able to communicate, they are able to utilize the available resources in that community. So I think that is something that every community, and I'm not speaking just broadly cultural, but every geographical community should have some form of structure to make sure that there is planning, that there is coordination, and then communities will develop and will be much more prosperous.
When do you retire?
Well, I don't want to make Julius Malema happy, but no, it will,
AfriForum will continue whether you're there or not.
Yeah, it will probably be in 9 years' time.
Wow. So you've already given a thought to time.
No. Well, I think that one of the problems also in the past with Afrikaner organizations, it aged. And you must realize, even though you might not be very old, you are actually blocking young people and new ideas from coming through. Yeah. I'll probably still be involved in one form or another if they want me to do so, and if I'm still of sound mind. But that I think one should, if an organization is not youthful and creates opportunities for young people, it would become a dying organization.
It becomes stale.
Yes. Old.
Wow. I've always wanted to have this conversation, really just to understand the role of AfriForum in our South African, discourse and conversation, because I genuinely think that we don't know what we don't know, and we carry on every day thinking we know because we read headlines and we read, these statements that we see. And I'm really glad and really happy that you made the time to come here and to clarify your role in all of this, because it's easy for us to conclude that you're just another Afrikaner nationalist group of people who want their old South African flag to come back and apartheid to come back. And it's easy for us to make those conclusions. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It was great speaking to you, and I've used up all my English vocabulary, so it's great that we are stopping now.
Thank you again. I appreciate it. That's the leader of AfriForum. Thank you so much.
King David Studio Podcast.